On November 18, 1978, 918 men, women, and children died in the middle of the Guyanese jungle. What had once been the religious movement of the decade resulted in the single largest loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act until September 11, 2001. At the face of the tragedy was one man, one preacher, one so-called savior who had promised his people a life of peace, but had instead given them pain, sorrow, and eventually for many, death.
How was it that Jim Jones could deceive and entrap so many people? How was it that Jones could recruit so many people of all ages, races, and genders to believe in his cause and religion, and invest so much faith in him that he could eventually lead so many to their deaths? What happened inside the People's Temple and led to its tragically climactic ending forever changed hundreds of families in American society?
Jim Jones was born in May of 1931 in the small rural town of Lynn, Indiana. Jones's family was one of the poorest of the poor after being hit hard during the Great Depression. Jim's father was also unable to work because of a mustard gas injury from World War I. As a result of living in a dysfunctional family, Jones suffered a great deal of neglect and pain during his childhood. In school, Jones was different from most boys. Instead of having an obsession with athletics, arts, or exploration, Jones was keen on religion. According to his childhood neighbors, Jones would hold religious ceremonies for his friends and funerals for animals in the loft of his barn. An even more ominous warning sign was that Jones would occasionally lock his friends in the loft just to see how they would react. Jones's early obsession with religion, control, and death clearly fueled his desire to attempt to change the world, and more importantly, foreshadowed his maniacal personality.
Jones founded the People's Temple in 1955 after years of desperately trying to find a congregation that supported his Marxist views. Fully named the People's Temple Christian Church Full Gospel, Jones' church welcomed people of all races, but specifically targeted the black population. Jones worked to help blacks in poverty and took them in as his own. The People's Temple exploded in popularity in 1960 when Jones was appointed the Director of Human Rights Commissions in Indianapolis. Jones used his position to advertise his church through the media. However, Jones received much criticism for integrationist views in Indiana and felt that a move was necessary for his church to thrive.
In 1961, Jones, his family, and other temple members moved to Brazil to set up the church. Brazil, as expected, was a safer place for Jones and a small number of his followers to be, but in 1963 he returned to the States after hearing news that the People's Temple in America might collapse without his leadership. From Indianapolis, Jones and the temple moved again, this time to Ukiah, California. Here, the People's Temple was able to peacefully start their own community and live off the land around them. It was during this time that the temple gained many of its members. Jones would lead his people across the country on bus trips and would recruit hundreds of new members. In the late 60s and early 70s, the gospel of the People's Temple began to break away from that of traditional Christianity. Jones rejected the Bible and even the idea of a Christian afterlife.
Heaven is on earth. That's the only heaven you'll find. God is here. That's the only God you'll know.
What made Jones's philosophy attractive to so many people was both his charisma and the sense of security that he emanated. He was talented at finding people's weaknesses and then providing for them what they lacked.
The temple grew to such a size that Jim Jones received recognition on a national scale. He began to constantly meet with politicians and received large amounts of praise for the peaceful work he and his people were doing. The move to San Francisco brought with it mass media scrutiny. After Martin Kilduff, a San Francisco Chronicle reporter, was met with resistance after writing an expose detailing the physical, sexual, and emotional abuse he experienced during his tenure with the People's Temple, he brought his story to New West magazine. During this time, Jones was preparing a community in Guyana, where he and his people would eventually move to distance themselves from the injustices of America. After learning that such a negative article regarding the temple was to be published, Jones and his followers hastily moved to Guyana overnight. The settlement was named Jonestown after Jones himself.
After the move to Jonestown, the vigor of People's Temple members began to decline. In Jonestown, members were not permitted to leave, and rather than the paradise many had expected, Jonestown was more of a prisoner's compound. People were crammed into houses, and Jones would record himself on the loudspeaker throughout the night. Even worse, Jones would regularly hold mock suicides in which he would make his members drink supposedly cyanide-laced Kool-Aid before telling them that it was a test of loyalty.
Following the abrupt and suspicious move, Jones lost much of his political support. In 1978, Congressman Leo Ryan made the decision to go and investigate the happenings in Jonestown along with an NBC crew. During much of his visit, Ryan was pleasantly surprised when the people of Jonestown seemed joyful, but things took a turn for the worse on the last day of his stay, when numerous members approached him in confidence and expressed their desire to leave. At the time, Jones made no objection to anyone leaving.
As the Ryan delegation planned to leave and board their plane, armed members of the People's Temple arrived on the airstrip and opened fire on the congressman and others. 5 people, including Ryan, were killed before they could flee the scene. Later that same day, Jim Jones told his People's Temple members that there was no escape for them.
We're not letting them take our lives. We're laying down our lives. We're taking their lives. We just want peace.
Jones pleaded with his people to drink cyanide-laced Kool-Aid in order to kill themselves. Children were shot with needles of potassium cyanide. By the end of the carnage, 918 People's Temple members lay dead on the floor of the compound they had once envisioned as paradise on earth. Jones himself was found dead with a gunshot wound that was likely self-inflicted.
Jones's charisma and influence as a leader was so great that he was essentially able to lure more than 900 people to their deaths. He possessed some of the qualities of a great leader, but instead used his gained power for evil. For much of his leadership, he seemed outspoken, outgoing, honest, and a man who wanted to better the lives of the people. The people that joined the People's Temple wanted to be a part of something bigger than themselves. They wanted to change the world.
Jones tapped into these people's wants and needs. He tapped into their joys and fears. By 1977, he was in so much control that he was able to literally move hundreds of members to a foreign country overnight with nearly no previous notice. By then, it was too late for most of the members of People's Temple. Once Jones had his church isolated from the watchful eyes of America, he was free to do almost whatever he wanted, and in the end, that resulted in the death of 918 people.
Jones was so incredibly influential that he got people to overlook his many flaws. According to most, he was paranoid, an alcoholic, and an excessive drug user. However, people still believed that he was a good person with good intentions. What happened on November 18, 1978 changed American society forever. Never before had so many civilian lives been lost in a deliberate act or attack. Jim Jones and what he did to nearly 1,000 people is a major reason why the word cult is said with such negative connotations in modern society.
The nonchalant phrase, "drank the Kool-Aid," directly stems from the mass suicide or mass murder that occurred in Jonestown. This phrase has become a popular term used in American society today, and yet not many know its true origin. This is part of the legacy Jim Jones left behind. The death of the People's Temple and the legacy of Jim Jones directly influenced the creation of the phrase, "drinking the Kool-Aid." This phrase dictated how modern American society views cult followings. An event similar to Jonestown's suicide is highly unlikely to ever occur again in America because people are wary of cult followings, all because of Jones. Jim Jones always wanted to change the world, even from a young age. While he didn't change it pleasantly, he certainly had an impact.
you.